will now formally request for Dhamma talk. Rama Chaloka Dipati Sampati Katanjali An Divarangaya Jata Santi Dasata Araja Kajatika Dese Dudava Anukam Imam Paja.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Good evening again, or good morning, depending what part of the planet you're on. Anyway, nice to be with you. Perhaps a little bit of news from the monastery. You might be interested what's going on here. Well, the most exciting thing, but rather unfortunate, is one of our monks broke his ankle, which is not good, but he got a cast today. So he has to be immobile or he has to lay in bed for 2 weeks as much as possible. He's had ankle problems for quite a long time, so it's not surprising. That's the Venerable Monastery, who some of you see. He answers the emails. He's my secretary, and he also does a lot of very good things, the accounts at the monastery, so we wish him speedy recovery. He's actually with me in the corner, but he's sitting on a chair, so he's a bit embarrassed. So I've left him in the corner of the room, not because he's naughty, but because he's embarrassed of being on a chair. He's a very dutiful monk. And then the other monk with me is Venerable Vipassi. He's on the technical side. And the rest of us are good. We're healthy, no problems. And the monastery is very interesting just now because now all the mammals and birds are giving birth to their young ones. So we have twice as many squirrels running around and twice as many chipmunks and twice as many birds. So it's very, 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 very alive with all kinds of interesting wildlife. And the most interesting was about 4 days ago, we were looking out to the neighbor's field, and there was a black bear. And a black bear with probably a yearling, so one of its youngsters. And we were downwind, so it couldn't. And black bears have bad eyesight, so they couldn't smell us. They had good smell, and they couldn't hear us. So we were able to watch them with our binoculars for a whole half hour. And that's I've lived here for many years, but others have seen the bears, but I've never seen it. So it's quite exciting for me. So the black bear is it's not dangerous. It's a very shy animal, but it is beautiful. But it weighs maybe, a big female bear, maybe 500 pounds. So you don't want to get between the baby and mom, because that won't be good. In any case, it's a really beautiful time of year. So I'll carry on and give a discourse, and I'll use a question that came to us. But if I just may do a preamble on what I'm going to say, is that I assume that the listeners, that you have a good knowledge of Theravada Buddhism, so I won't be speaking to beginners. So if you don't have a good working knowledge of the concepts of Theravada Buddhism, some study would be excellent, a good idea. Many good books, and to understand the terminology I use or the ideas, sometimes people, they get a bit lost because they don't know the context and how it might work. So, but I don't want to just speak to beginners all the time, and I'm not an academic, so I don't want to teach the kind of basics that one needs for the practice. And then I also assume that everyone has a commitment to sila, or to morality, that we're committed to nonviolence and to honesty and to caring for ourselves and the planet and to truthfulness and sobriety and fidelity and all those good things. So those two, commitment to a good life, both a moral life and a socially conscious life, a socially engaged life where we're expressing generosity, and an understanding of the teaching. Those, I assume that all of us are on board for that, which is a lot. If all of humanity was just doing that, we'd be doing very, very well. So if I could go to the question, read the question, and then see what comes from me for an answer. Last week, you highlighted the role of doubt and confidence in our practice. And you talked about how, over the years, you've been using Ajahn Chah's teachings on uncertainty and the uncreated as the backbone to your practice. Can you explain what is uncertainty and how you use uncertainty to lead your practice? So once again, just a question. Last week, you highlighted the role of doubt and confidence in our practice. And you talked about how, over the years, you've been using Ajahn Chah's teachings on uncertainty and the uncreated as the backbone for your practice. Can you explain what is uncertainty and how you use uncertainty to lead your practice? So the word in the Pali that we're thinking about is anicca, change, and the way Ajahn Chah phrased it was maine, which can be, I think, translated as uncertainty or not sure. So there's many ways to look at change. Now, uncertainty in a functional sense, if you're like, we have car insurance, we have fire insurance, we have personal liability insurance. So and when I travel, I have travel insurance. So I deal with the uncertainty by actually addressing it, by trying to be certain. And then to not have fire insurance would be remiss of me. If the buildings burned down and we hadn't insured them, then all the dana that lay people had given us would be just wasted. So uncertainty is a natural part of life, and part of being human is to try to make things secure. Otherwise, it wouldn't make any sense. So we do our best for security. So if I like with Amarasiri, then Amarasiri, he's got a really bad ankle, and we say, go to the doctor, get an x-ray, make sure. Oh, it'll be all right. No, make sure. Uncertainty, go to the doctor, check it. It's cracked. Right? So on a worldly sense, we deal with uncertainty that way. And if we didn't, we'd be foolish. It'd be really silly to not work that way. But even having done that, having done all like due diligence, life's still uncertain. You may get fire insurance, and the buildings may burn down, and the insurance company might renege on their payments. It's unsure. It's minor. It's uncertain. Now, if you just thought about uncertainty as a possibility, you'd become very, very paranoid and anxious. Like, it's uncertain. It's terrible. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? But that's worrying. That's just worrying with a sense of self into the future that something terrible might happen. And it might. It might happen the next moment. So that's not what Ajahn Chah meant, is to worry. Right? But I think what's important in the teachings of the forest monks, or I think from the text, that you realize that the texts and the teachings that we get from practitioners, they're meant for reflection, rather than some kind of a position, some kind of a dogmatic position. So you could say Buddhists believe in change. Well, everyone believes in change. That's nothing special. But the act of reflection is taking the teaching and then bringing the perception that the Buddha is asking us to perceive into the present moment. So the way I like to think of right understanding in a Noble Eightfold Path, you have right understanding, which is intellectual right understanding. So you study the text, you look at the Eightfold Path, the Four Noble Truths, dependent origination, anicca dukkha anatta, all the different ways that the Buddha talked about the human experience and how to be peaceful or how to be free in the human experience. So that's intellectual right understanding. Another way to look at right understanding is that when I know that I know, when I know that I'm sitting here and I'm feeling this way, then I also understand. And this is an experiential understanding or existential understanding rather than just an idea, right? Just a kind of concept that's in my mind, a Buddhist concept of anicca. Now, if within this experiential right understanding or awareness, because awareness is right understanding, you're aware of the way things are. You know the in-breath feels this way, you know the out-breath feels this way. That's right understanding. And I bring into that the capacity to reflect and observe. I bring in the Buddhist teachings. Then I have the combination of experiential or existential or present right understanding and the intellectual right understanding. So the teaching says that which begins ends. Now, as a philosophical or an obvious thing, it's just a tautology. It's true, sure, that which begins ends. And if you just leave it like that, it's just an idea or a thought. But if you bring that into your present experience and say you start to experience, let's say, you're critical about something. You're critical about, one of the family members isn't washing the dishes as much as they should do, or I'm doing all the work, they're not doing the work. You become, say, judgmental. And that's a perception. It has begun. Now, if you have enough mindfulness to know, I know that I know this feeling, and you put into that which has a nature to begin, has a nature to end, or it's uncertain, or it's unreliable, what that does to your mind, it puts you in the observer position rather than being taken by the thoughts, being driven by the thoughts and believing in the thoughts in a kind of egotistical way. So by saying it's uncertain, you get distance and space around this judging. Not that the judging's wrong, but a lot of our perceptions, like judgment or self-judgment or whatever, are just attitudes and habits. And these attitudes and habits, when they're informed with ignorance, cause us suffering. So the idea in Buddhist awareness practice is that how can I get more space around the way the mind moves, and how can I move back into the space and silence of the mind rather than be caught up into the thoughts and objective emotions and attitudes that I get caught up into. So Longpa Cha's suggestion constantly bring up the perception of uncertainty. So my mind starts to worry about something, uncertain. Now, you're not saying I shouldn't worry, and you're not saying there is no problem. Yeah, life is uncertain. But by saying it's uncertain, you get this distance and real mindfulness that this feeling of uncertainty, this perception of uncertainty, this perception of worry of the future that I'm thinking about, this worrying sense of self, is uncertain. It's not permanent. It's unreliable. So all of a sudden you have a bit of space and silence around this attitude. And that attitude can be very habitual and just comes up again and again. And so let's think about perceptions, how perceptions work. Let's say you run a business, and you have someone in the office who used to be a really good worker, and all of a sudden the person's very slow, comes late, seems to be not interested, and you have the perception that they're lazy. That's your perception, lazy. And then someone says to you, actually, this lady's 10-year-old child died of cancer last week. All of a sudden your perception changes. Now, it's the same person, same kind of slowness, but now your understanding of the person is different than it was before. And that's perception, isn't it? And then from that perception, because it's more accurate, you can function more accurately, right? And so what the teaching on impermanence or uncertainty is an attempt to really get us to the place of witnessing how things change and not being caught in the habits of thought and the judgments that seem so very, very certain. Now, some of you who have done retreats with me, you know, when I talk about the life of the Buddha, how the Buddha dealt with uncertainty, we have the allegorical story of the Buddha being the prince and being very secure and being very gifted and being cared for and being talented and good looking. He's got all the worldly things that he could imagine or want, and yet he has doubts. And so, as we know, he's taken to the market. Chana, the charioteer, takes them. Very kind of allegorical story. And for the first time in his life, he sees a sick person. Now, I can't believe that he never saw a sick person in real life, but what that is a kind of allegory for when we finally see that sickness is our lot. We all get sick, and young people don't usually think about that so much. When you're my age, you see it more, peers dying or whatever. So this insight arose in the Buddha that, I am not beyond sickness. How can you go beyond sickness? So he saw the insecurity of being physically incarnate and the possibility of being sick. I mean, that's a real test of your sense of security when you bring that up. And in the second vision, he goes into the marketplace another day and he sees an old person, a really, really old, and the description is a very ancient person, bent over with age and thin and barely walking and quite a lot of suffering. And the Buddha has the same realization. I am not beyond aging. So he sees the insecurity in physical form. And then, of course, the third incident is he goes into the marketplace with China, and for the first time he sees a dead person. Never seen that before. We know the story. But and so all of a sudden he awakens, wow, I am not beyond dying. Now that's interesting. No amount of insurance can get you beyond dying. You can take out life insurance, but you won't live forever. It doesn't work that way. Your relatives will get the money. So how can you take out insurance for death? Huh? What are you going to do? So the Buddha's question, if we're thinking about security and safety and certainty, it was the ultimate question. Is there anything that is beyond dying? That was his question. And you can see how any amount of worldly certainty is always fraught. It's always difficult that way. It's never certain. It's uncertain. So the question that Ajahn Chah asks us to put to our experience around, it's uncertain, it's uncertain, it's uncertain, so that we don't grasp the experience of consciousness and of changing consciousness, of experiential consciousness, of sense consciousness, so that we don't grasp that. And as we don't grasp it, we see that behind or within all experience there's a deep silence. There's a deep stillness which is not subject to the changing nature of sense experience. It's unchanging. It's asankata. So the fourth message that he gets, or the fourth insight or vision that he has is, again, the fourth time he goes to the market. And sometimes people forget that there was this fourth insight that he had. He sees a sadhu, and the sadhu is meditating, and he asks Chana, what's that guy doing? And Chana says, oh, he's a yogi, he's a sadhu, and he's seeking the deathless. So this is what the Buddha was interested in. Oh, there is such a thing, and this is the gift of Indian philosophy and Indian culture, is they had this idea, and it must have been through experience in the culture, that there is a transcendent realization that is not born and does not die. We call it sometimes nibbana, or sometimes the uncreated, the unformed, the unoriginated. We call it the island, the refuge, safety, peace. We call it supreme happiness. When you call it supreme happiness, that's difficult because then you think it's a sense experience. But it's not unhappy, that's for sure. Right? So there's all this interesting language around it, but the way the Buddha says that, and he does realize it now, so his search is fruitful. So for me, that's very important in terms of why the teaching on uncertainty and why the teaching on the certain. There is something certain. Now, if you took Buddhism, if you took a part of Buddhism and said everything is uncertain, well, what about the Buddha's realization? What about Nibbana? What about the unconditioned, uncreated? And Buddhists will do that inadvertently and say everything's changing. No, not quite. That which has the nature to arise has the nature to cease. Now, that's not being just pedantic and playing with words. It's saying, don't look for that which is certain or constant in that which is changing. Simple enough, right? So if there is something that's unchanging, uncreated, unoriginated, what might that be? Well then, as we know, the teaching goes through a listing of the sense experiences that we have. Again and again we hear that sound is impermanent, sight is impermanent, bodily feeling is impermanent, smell is impermanent, taste is impermanent, mental formations are permanent, all the objects of our lives, our families and so on, they are unsure. Now, that does not mean they're bad. We don't reject them. And that does not mean that we don't take care of them. So we still take out insurance, and we still love our kids as much as we can, and we still give to them, and so on and so forth. So that's the worldly part. Dana, sila, social responsibility, familial responsibility. That gives us purpose. That gives us joy. So it's not a negation of our usual life. Some people who don't understand Buddhism from outside Buddhist context, they think the Buddhists are kind of nihilistic teaching, where there's nothing. Not true, not true. It's just that the teaching is pointing to the fact that you can certainly have beauty in life, but beauty is uncertain. And because it's uncertain, it's unsatisfactory in the sense that if you want to find the certain, don't look for it in beauty. So be grateful for beauty, be grateful for harmony, be grateful for good health, but when it changes, well, that's the way it's supposed to be. Beauty is supposed to change, perception of beauty. So you start to bring up this perception or this way of looking, oh, this is uncertain. And you have to do it, actually, not just believe in it, you have to do it constantly. And this is what Lumpur Cha was encouraging. So I personally, as the question is asking sort of personally how I use this, well, let's say I'm doing something difficult, and my mind says, this is really difficult, I can't do this. And then I say uncertain. That brings me back from the kind of finality and absoluteness of this is very difficult, I can't do it, to, oh, this is difficult, well, maybe I can do it. It takes me away from the kind of sense of permanence around that particular perception. Or this person is bad, uncertain. This person is good, uncertain. Now, they may be bad in some moral way, or they may be good in some moral way, but that always gives me a distance to notice that is a perception. Is it true? I can check it out. The story I often tell is that many of you might have heard this story, but we were in Hampstead Vihara, and we had a man who wanted to live at Chithurst, the monastery. We were starting the land we had purchased, and we were about to move there. And there was a fellow staying with us that wanted to come, and I was unsure about whether he'd fit into the community. So I asked Ajahn Chah. I said, this fellow, and Ajahn Chah was in the Vihara in London too, and I asked him, he said, so what do you think of this fellow? And Ajahn Chah, what did he say? Uncertain. Now I thought the great master knows. You know, he's got insights, and he sees people, and he's seen him. He'll tell me the answer. Uncertain. Now it's also uncertain because the way we respond to people creates people. You know, if I'm unkind to someone, they'll be unkind to me, and I'll say to you, that person's really unkind. Uncertain. And then you're kind to that person's kind to you back. You say, well, it's a different person. Well, uncertain. It's a different perception. So I think the real nub of this is you want to bring your mind to a sense of you know that you know. You know this moment is like it is. And then non-grasping is to see the arising and ceasing of things. And once you get into that, then there's the flow of Dharma, the flow of experience, but you begin to see that within experience, there is something constant. And this, from that question, my mind began to then question, well, wait a minute, is there something that's certain? So that's the kind of inquiry that helped me to look at my experience. So then I said, okay, if the teaching says that which arises, ceases, is uncertain, and my Lompa Sumedho would constantly stress there is the uncreated, the unoriginated, the unborn, Nibbana. He constantly says that. He remind me of that. He says, not just your emotions, Viradhammo. There is stability, there is peace. That's a possibility. I said, well, where is it? My mind's such a mess. Where is that? And he'd say, well, just be the knowing. It's in the awareness itself. And I said, well, yeah, okay, but I have all this anger and fear. Minor, uncertain. So my teachers, Lompa Sumedho and Lompa Cha, they began to just encourage me that an anger arose and passed away. Oh, and it stayed for a while, and I felt this way. So the encouragement in the awareness practice was not to be a different person, not to become another kind of person, but to know change. Now, sometimes the feelings that we have are very powerful. It's very hard to endure them. But when you bring up the perception this will change, then the seeming permanence of it. Because sometimes our emotional work can seem very solid and permanent and intractable, can't it? You know, fears and worries about our kids and worries about our health. They can seem so very powerful. They are powerful. But once you put in language perceptions, not just a thought, but this is uncertain or unreliable, this is changing, and then you bring your mind to a sense of attention. Is it permanent? Is this permanent? And by observing that any emotion, any thought, any feeling, any structure is changing, you begin to intuit, that knowing, that's the gateway to the unchanging. That's the gateway to peace. You begin to intuit that because you're constantly doing this. You're doing, rather than getting caught up, let's say you do something which is unpleasant or you do something which is a bit foolish or whatever, and then you feel regret. And then you start to think, I'm a terrible person, uncertain. Then I'm a terrible uncertain. And all of a sudden you see that very idea of being a terrible person arose and passed away because of conditions. When I said this, I got that. And you start to see that it's not you, a personal entity that's doing all this, it's just cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect. You can put into it good causes for good effects, but you begin to see that movement, behind that movement, is the unchanging through the knowing. So you start to see what refuge in Buddha is. The refuge in Buddha can be a cultural thing that we do. So we Bhutang Saranam Gacchami and so on, Dhammang Saranam Gacchami. But what is it as a kind of experiential and existential thing? What would refuge mean? Then it would mean that I know Dharma, not knowing in terms of thought, but knowing in terms of, it's like this, the Dharma is like this experience is like this. And that is so close to us. It's so obvious that we miss it. And we go trying to find Dharma, or trying to find Buddha, or trying to find peace. And that's why we are so adamant, or so, let us say, that's why we are asked to really carefully consider tanha. Now, tanha in Buddhism means, it's translated as craving, but as you know, there is desire which is good, and desire which brings wrong results. And so the desire to be peaceful is a good thing, isn't it? The desire to help your family is a good thing. So tanha is referring to a craving in the mind which is not conjoined with wisdom, let us say. So the basic craving that we have is to find the perfect happy experience. And all experience is uncertain. And until we see that, we're always looking outside in our emotions, in our families, and so on, to get the perfect kind of balanced experience. And when it changes, we forget uncertainty and we're disappointed. So we move from disappointment to inspiration, disappointment to inspiration. And that movement, we don't see that disappointment conditions inspiration, conditions disappointment. That's the way it works. So when we start to see that, we feel very inspired by something. We've been through that cycle 100 times. All of a sudden, Dharma comes up, we say, it's uncertain. Now, you still feel inspired, but you see that it's not a permanent reality. It will change. And when it does change to being disappointing, you don't blame. You don't feel like your practice has gone down the tube. You say to the disappointment, uncertain. And then you start to have upekkha. You still feel inspired, you still feel disappointed, but it's no big deal. It's not a big deal because what's bigger in your own consciousness and in your own practice, and in your own perceptions, I would say, in your own perceptions, there's the idea of uncertainty because you've practiced with it. You've actually employed it as a way of looking at experience. So in any situation where you believe in its permanence, you'll see that you either go high or low. Now, all of us go through these kind of cycles, and as we mature, we become more peaceful, but hopefully we don't become more cynical. Now, you can see how a person would feel inspired, then be disappointed, feel inspired, disappointed, feel inspired, disappointed, and it becomes cynical. You say, oh, it's just a rotten world anyway. But that's not peace. That's another ego position. It's Buddhism is terrible. You know, all they talk about is change. It's so depressing. That's more thought. But what this perception of change, it's not negating or saying inspiration is wrong. It's just saying it's limited. It's a limited, it's a sankhara, it's a construct. So enjoy it. Great. Do something with the inspiration. But make something, go to something which is more deeper. And so you begin to contemplate what is unchanging. So as you feel inspiration, you say, yeah, what's unchanging? And then your mind starts to feel doubt, what's unchanging? Your mind hears sound, what's unchanging? Your body feels pain, what's unchanging? And you begin to combine the practice of uncertainty with the practice of contemplating unchanging. What is that? Where is that? And the only thing you get to is the abandonment of craving, because craving is always seeking the uncertain. You get it, you lose it, you get it, you lose it, you get it, you lose it. You start to abandon that strategy of following tanha, and you come back to an interesting question, well, what's unchanging? Now, obviously, you need a lot of presence of mind for this. You know, if you're really upset and confused and so on, you need a lot of subtlety. You need to meditate. But I think we should remember that the Buddha's own search was for that certainty. It was for the certainty of something inward rather than something outward. And that he was victorious. And that his teaching came from that insight, from that realization. Right? That's why he taught. So then, if he's teaching the practice of liberation from uncertainty, why did he teach what he taught? Well, he taught the Four Noble Truths because when we're suffering, you know, we're attached to craving, which is always involved in the uncertain world. So when we look at suffering and we regard it, oh, suffering, it feels like this, it's uncertain, we come back to, I know that I know. I know what I feel. I feel uncertain, or I feel doubt, or I feel pain, or I feel upset. It's uncertain. So we come back home all the time. And tanha will go out. So tanha will go out, it's your fault. It's their fault. It shouldn't be like this. And so on and so forth. And then the mind coming in is, oh, this is anger. It feels like this. But it's uncertain. Not me, not mine. Uncertain, not me, not mine. Like a mantra, but the mantra isn't just mouthing it. You're not just being a kind of good Buddhist, but you actually have to bring up the perception. Just as in the example I gave of the person in the office being seen as being lazy maybe because they're slow, and then you're told that the person's child has died of cancer, your perception has actually changed. right? It's not just an idea about people having cancer suffering. It's the same kind of transformation we're trying to effect by bringing up a Dharma. It's true. It's not untrue. It's not a philosophy. But we're trying to apply it to things that we get attached to, that seem so permanent and so real and so fixed. So say in families with husband and wife, sometimes you find, because I think everyone's locked down, you're kind of getting to know each other again. I don't know. But maybe, there's a kind of perception that she is this way or he is that way. And why is he this way? And then when that perception comes up, it can be so inbuilt in the mind. It can be so conditioned in the mind. Or parents for children and children for parents. And so if you can see that perception of the person, you're not saying it's right or wrong, you say it's uncertain. And then you're back into silence, into peace, where you can respond well. But if you don't do that, sometimes human communication just becomes a kind of like two automatic robots. You say this, I react like that. I react like this, you react like that. It's bang, 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 bang. It's like a pinball game. And there's no sati, there's no awareness, there's no originality, there's no vibrancy. And it's not demanding that you be different, not have these perceptions, just awakening to it. That's a perception, it's uncertain. It's a very interesting thing to do. The beauty of this is it's not asking you to become anything. So it's not a function of tanha, but it's asking you to remember something. It's a remembering, isn't it? So remembering is like, let's say let's say you've got company coming and you're chopping vegetables, right? And you've got a lot of vegetables to chop. You've got carrots and celery and bang, 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 bang. You're very careful or you lose your finger. Unless you have a dull knife, in which case you should bruise your finger. But you're careful, aren't you? You remember that you're chopping vegetables. Your mind might start to think about tomorrow. Wait. If you don't, you have to put a Band-Aid on your finger. So that's remembering, isn't it? You don't become aware. You remember to be aware to chop the veggies. In the same way, you don't become aware. You don't say to yourself, I must be more aware. No, you're just more aware. It's not something you do tomorrow. I mean, you can make the suggestion, try to be more present, try to be more aware, I know that I know. But it's something you're recollecting or remembering, and then within that recollection, you're trying to bring up, it's uncertain. Just try it out. See how it works. Right? Hopefully it doesn't bring you to worry, because that's not the point. Because if it brings you to worry, it's uncertain. So you deal the best you can with making it a certain world. So like here, we plan for winter. We get firewood in, and we do repairs on our machinery, and we make sure that the monks have medicines that they need, and so on and so forth. So without dismissing all that, we're also interested in the Buddha's realization that he went beyond dying. I have not gone beyond dying. I have not gone beyond aging. I have not gone beyond sickness. That's what we often chant. I am of nature to die. I have not gone beyond dying. I have nature to sicken. I have not gone beyond sickness. I have nature to age. I have not gone beyond aging. And the Buddha did. He did go beyond that. And you think, wow. And does that mean he floated up to heaven? No, because he was there. He was there with everyone else for 45 years. He trained monks. He had difficult monks, good monks, bad monks. Trained nuns. He had lay people. He had all the worldly. You imagine how many people came to see him? So he wasn't abstracted in some kind of a weird way. He was very present, very compassionate, very skillful in the world of uncertainty. But he had found certainty in his own heart, in his own mind, by noticing that which has a nature to arise has a nature to cease. Remember the Dhammacakka Sutta, the first sutta. Kondanya at the end of it, Anya Kondanya. He knows. What does he know? That which has a nature to arise has a nature to cease. Now, if you just take that as a philosophical principle, that's what Kondanya knows, great. But if you take it into your heart, into what you're experiencing, I suggest that it constantly bring you back to silence, to that which is unchanging. And in the beginning, it's not much. It's just a kind of silence, or not much. But you have to trust in it. Trust in it. And then the silence becomes really vast and deep. In the beginning, it just seems like nothing. To be very, very patient and trusting in that, And that's what Ajahn Chah would say, just keep doing it, keep doing it. It's uncertain. And after a while, I wouldn't ask him any questions because he would say it's uncertain. What are you going to say, right? So those are some thoughts on that question. Please.
Thank you, Lord. Let's all say 3 sadhus together. Han damayam ovadatamagatayo sadhu karang kadama se sadhu 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 anumodami.
This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties, and peaceful in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud and demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove, wishing in gladness and in safety. May all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another, or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another, even as a mother protects with her life her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, upwards and unbounded, free from hatred and ill will, whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness. One should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding, by not holding to fixed views. The pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. All right, Cameron? There we go. Okay. Bye-bye. Nice to be with you. Be happy. All right.